Hey guys, before we dive into the show, I wanted to tell you about the perfect trailer cue blueprint, which is 100% free and you can download it right now over at thetrailermusicschool.com/blueprint. Now, this blueprint will help you to completely understand the structure of trailer music, how to build tracks that will be more licensable and have more impact and capture the right people's attention. So whenever you start writing a cue, make sure you've got this blueprint to hand and you can use it to help speed up your process, feel more confident that you've crafted a well-structured trailer cue before you send it off to that publisher or editor or supervisor. Okay, let's get into the episode.
One man, one microphone, and one medium-sized coffee. Welcome to the Trailer Music Composers Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. You know what? It's actually been quite a long time since I've done this, and for the first time in a very long time, I actually recorded the intro like 4 times because I felt very self-conscious. That is the one downside with walking around with your mobile phone and recording a podcast, because the intro is like the most obvious bit that you're not talking to somebody else. Right now, this is great. It sounds like I'm just talking, you know? Whereas when you open up and you're like, hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Trailer Music Composers Podcast. It does, you know, it makes you sound like one of those people, you know, who've got a podcast, those. Anyway, I shouldn't be so ashamed of what I'm doing. You know, a little bit of embarrassment struck in there. Anyway, let's go to the chase. Today, it's quite a different episode, actually. I've started to change tack a little bit with the Trailer Music School in that I'm starting to bring what I'm doing onto the podcast into articles and tutorials. So rather than it just me releasing sporadic bursts of podcast episode, I'm trying to tie these in to more detailed articles that obviously tie into my courses and tie into more YouTube videos. So this is pretty exciting for me, and I'm really, really enjoying it. It's great because I forget, you know, because for so long I was in education, I kind of pushed it away from myself because I wanted to be a big-time, big-shot composer. But, you know, and you get to the point you go, oh, I actually really enjoyed educating people about stuff. And I still do. I mean, I know that I enjoy it, and I still do because I created the school. But, yeah, anyway, so I'm kind of rekindling my passion for sharing my knowledge again. Anyway, so today, this episode is all about one of the simplest things that we as composers can use as a tool to communicate so much. I'm all for communicating more with less. And what I'm talking about here is how, as composers, we kind of create a landscape. We create a feeling, we create a mood, we create pace, we create so much with the vibrations that we put in. And I'm not just talking about like, you know, the hippie vibrations. I'm talking about the actual vibrations of the music that we create. You know, I love it when you can say a lot with very little. And these things do just that. Drones, guys. Now, it's quite interesting because I started writing the article on this and I was thinking to myself, you know, am I really going to spin out? Am I really going to be able to say a lot about drones? I mean, I love drones. But can I really say a lot about them? I started writing, I was like, oh, Gordon Bennett. I can say loads about drones because drones are freaking awesome. I mean, they do so much for us as composers. I mean, anyway, before I start like jumping ahead, this is my first almost scripted podcast as well. This is quite, you hear this? It's the sound of rustling paper, guys. Richard has come prepared today. Well, I'm always prepared. You know, it's just, usually it's in my mind, but this one, because I've got like notes, I feel like I'm giving you guys a speech. So it's all about drones. And the thing I want to talk about is how we can use them to not only make our music better, but then how we can take those drones and make them better to make our music doubly even more awesome. Because oftentimes drones are overlooked because they're one of those simple things. You just, oh, just chuck a drone. You forget that actually a drone is like a subgenre of music. There's drone music because you can create so much in a drone. It's just fantastic. So first of all, for those of you who are thinking to yourselves, wait a second, is he talking about those little flying helicopter things? No, I'm not talking about those drones. And I'm not talking about the male bees either, the drones. I'm talking about drones in music. And put it simply, it's one note or one group of notes or one sound that plays continuously. You know, you could argue that ambient noise is a drone. You could argue that, you know, a single note on a double bass is a drone. Just a continuous note, usually long. And I could say that drones often play for a large part or the entire piece of music. So you can get whole pieces of music that just have a drone underneath. Or you can get, like in a lot of my tracks, you know, you have the first 30 to 60 seconds that has a drone underneath. Perhaps even the first 2 minutes that has a drone. I mean, just by saying that, it kind of oversimplifies the matter. So what I want to kind of get to is the importance of a drone. These long continuous notes and what they do. I mean, they can tell the entire story of your character in that note. They can function musically as a bass drone, i.e. it roots down the rest of the track with the root note of the cue, so that any melodies that sit on top of it are then explorations of the intervals within that key. I mean, that sounds incredibly muso, doesn't it? Yeah, I was just doing some exploration of intervals within the key of G flat. But what I'm trying to do is, you know, I learnt to play violin by putting drones on. I had drones in 12 keys. I'd press play, and it'd be sort of 5 minutes in C, 5 minutes in D flat, 5 minutes. You know, I'm not saying I would play for 60 minutes, but you kind of get the point that they can function for us musically as well as emotionally. And that's really, really important because, hello, little doggy. It's really important because when we're dealing with the emotions of it all, we forget that it has a function. It doesn't have to be the root note. It doesn't have to be the root in your bass. And drones don't have to be your bass either. They can be top-line drones, like string harmonics. They can be, you know, everywhere in between. The lowest note to the highest note in your track. But they function in several ways for us musically, underpinning the bass, or, overpinning the root note in the top end, or giving us functional harmony. So the drone could be the third of the key or the fifth of the key or whatever it is. But then emotionally, it tells the story. I mean, anyway, before I dive deeper into that, I realize I'm jumping ahead on my structured list. Anyway, so I mean, let's think about this in terms of instruments. I mean, any guitarists in the audience or piano players will know that you have sat down at one point or another playing one of the open strings and noodling on one of the other strings. So playing the open string E and just noodling on the A string, just to explore the interval. Same with piano. You're just hammering out this C drone while exploring how all the chords work with a C drone. So some instruments you can explore drones in themselves, but other instruments like the bagpipes have drones inherent in them. You know, think about when a bagpipe starts, it's like, and then the top line comes in because the drone pipe is there the whole time, pumping out the drone. So yeah, that's kind of like the backgroundy stuff behind drones. And, you get this a lot in Indian classical music as well, explorations of drones and top lines and all the beautiful nuances of microtonal tuning sat on that drone. But then you're going to say, okay, well, why do we use drones? And it kind of comes back to, for me, comes back to film scores. You've all been there, Well, I assume you have all been to the cinema. You're watching a horror movie. Young girl walks into a house. The house looks a bit suspicious, and then you hear it. This low drone. And what the low drone does is goes, before you've seen anything that's super dubious, the drone says, guys, something scary is coming up. Or, functionally, it's saying to you, this is how the protagonist is now starting to feel. A little bit uneasy. This is one function of the drone, is to communicate the emotion of the character. Another function of the drone is to communicate how you as the listener should be feeling. And another function of the drone is to set the landscape. So you think about how many trailers you've seen where it starts with string harmonics playing a drone. And just those few notes set the tone. You immediately see and feel and hear the landscape that we're in. The drone might be layered, but that's what it's doing. It's communicating the landscape. It's communicating the feeling, the emotion. It's kind of like telling you how you should feel. And that's why they're so good for us trailer composers, because it can allow us to tell the audience how our track is going to make them feel. You don't have to have anything else. You could start your track with a drone. And this is the mistake so many composers make, myself included sometimes, is to really overcomplicate your first act. Really overcomplicate your first act. Your first act doesn't, I wouldn't say just have a drone, but it can start as just a drone, just a single sustained note that indicates the feeling, indicates the landscape, sets the tone for the cue. I mean, ostensibly, that's what Act 1 is for, to set the tone of the track. But then you could say that the drone is the microcosm of Act 1. It kind of says, hey guys, let's get into business. This is how you should feel. And that's how we use it as trailer composers. And that comes from me, from score, and obviously score comes from the canon of classical music, because before there were film composers, there were real books, and I forget what they were called actually. These little piano books that had, and organ books that had choice pieces from the classical canon that evoked certain feelings. I've got one at home. So I should drag one out. So it'd be kind of like if the pianist who was playing to the silent movie required a certain feeling, he would look at in the index and it would say, joyous, play, I don't know, Beethoven something, whatever it is. And it would skip to there and it would play it. So that's how we have a lot of our film scoring dialogue musically, because it comes from that. It comes from the classical world of, well, this is how we know what superheroes feel like, because of these intervals that we use in these classical pieces that went all the way back there. And just so you know, I'm talking about classical, the genre, not the period of classical music, like Baroque, classical, romantic. I'm talking about classical music as in, like, if I was going to a CD shop, 20 years ago, there'd be classical and it would have, orchestral music, essentially. Because admittedly, some of those pieces in those little piano books weren't classical. They could have been romantic or Baroque or, whatever it is, post-romantic. So this is where our drones start to come in, because we're coming from this school of thought. And I think once you've established that, then it's really, really, really useful Hello. Walk past so many dog walkers on this route, so I usually whisper hello to the little doggies, who are either looking at me excitedly or aggressively, depending on how I'm feeling, of course. Anyway, so then it comes down to how can you make your own drones? Because, I mean, so many of us know the answers to this, but I wanted to go over some things because a drone isn't a drone, isn't a drone, isn't a drone. You know, a double bass playing a long sustained note is not your only drone. String harmonics are not your only drone. I know, I can see it. I can hear some of you just fell off your stools. What? So I'm going to give you the approaches I use to make my own drones, because one of the things I pride myself in is my approach to kind of DIY music. I love things that come straight out of the can, out of the box, but I also love recording my own crappy little versions. And that's my first one here, is to record your own drones. You don't have to be able to play an instrument well. You just have to make a continuous sound with it. Actually, to be fair, you don't even need to make continuous sound with it. You just need to make a sound with it. Record yourself playing with it. Record yourself playing it. So that sounded dodgy. Record yourself playing a long note or a series of notes. Because then you can use that as your starting point. Because the other thing is, okay, well, I'm just chucking a drone on, like let's say a double bass drone. Surely my double bass drone will sound like everyone else's. Yes, and that's why you don't record. You don't use your Symphobia bass samples. You record yourself playing your guitar with a bow, you drop it 2 octaves, you shove it through some compressors, and you have your own double bass drone that nobody else has. It's just magic, and it still amazes me how easy it is to overlook using creativity in your audio production. Because one of the battles we face as composers and musicians and producers is being able to put our own stamp on everything. And if you can record your own source audio, then you're already giving your track something else that nobody has. In my case, a terribly played violin. And yes, there are some of you who play terrible violin too. We're in a Facebook group together. The Terrible Violinists, we're called. But the point is, it's a unique recording that you can then use as like the start of your own terrible drone library. And then what you can do, this is on to the next point, is you use a piece of software called Pull Stretch. I encountered Pull Stretch quite a few years ago, back when I was on PC, so probably over a decade ago now. I don't know. Time has no meaning. And it was this kind of weird interface, like the old PC plugins used to be, that kind of like beigey grey with tiny little sliders everywhere. And I found it, and I loaded in a sample of me playing. At this point, when I could stretch audio up to this point, it always sounded glitchy and really digital, Because what happens when computer programs stretch audio is what it does is it kind of like, imagine you've got a flapjack, a really long flapjack, and it cuts up the flapjack into tiny slices and then separates them so to make it longer. But then what you have is these gaps. And what the computer does is kind of says, well, I'll fill in with this kind of like fake flapjack that I've copied from that flapjack slice there. So it gets this kind of like weird groany digital sound, which is great if you want that. But Pull Stretch allows you to not have that. And you can stretch things to hours. Not that you want that, but you can record yourself reciting a Keats poem and stretch it so that it's this. And it sounds brilliant. Not like that, but you get the point. So you can use this tool to take any sound going back to our first point, which is recording yourself playing, you can then take that sound of you playing your guitar once, put it through pull stretch it to 2 hours long. Your first note will be a drone. The attack of your note will be a drone. It's awesome. And then they've got all these wonderful snazzy effects on it now. I think it's got a much nicer interface these days, and it's just brilliant. And it's free. Cashback. Right, the other thing is generating a drone. So, we can all do this. We can load up a synth, go in there, produce a sound wave of some kind, sine, sawtooth, whatever it is, whatever it is, and then export it. You've generated a drone. You can then manipulate either within the synth itself or using effects chains. But I like to have a little play as well. There's this website called mynoise.net. It's got these drone generators. And what it is basically a drone that they have recorded with multiple layers, and then it's got these EQ sliders. Now, this isn't necessarily something you would use for music yourself, because you're kind of like taking it from someone else. But what it does is it kind of reminds you that you can do so much with one sound and some EQ frequencies. Go to the website. The link's in the article, which is where this episode will sit. You can kind of have a play with the sliders, and it's a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. Because then you go, I forget how much fun it is to just do this stuff in real time. That's what a lot of drone musicians do. They kind of manipulate the automation in real time. It's great fun. And it's really important that you remember that we're here to have fun. We're not here just to pump out a ton of tracks that sound like the latest Marvel trailer, although that's fun too. Anyway, then we're going on to effects, because I've talked about this anyway, but you can use the effects in the same way that Pull Stretch did, to take one single sound and make this new sound. You could say, record yourself playing a long sustained C note on the piano, chuck it through Valhalla Supermassive, which would then turn it into a 20-second, 30-second, 40-second reverb pad sound, then chuck that through some distortion to give it some texture, then chuck it through some modulation to give it some movement, and then put it back through another reverb, and all of a sudden you have a drone. It's this idea of trying to approach things from different angles, even these really simple things, because that way you keep the fun. I think one of the things I've learned over the years of achieving the dream for me of I'm a composer full time, is that even that job can get boring if you're not careful. And that's really, really important that you bear that in mind. So use effects to have some fun with it. And then we can take that the next step into the next point, which is record a sound that sounds like a drone from real life. Go start the engine of your car. Go grab your Zoom recorder or your iPhone or whatever it is you've got. Start the engine, open up the engine bonnet, and record that sound. Go into your kitchen, record your fridge, go into your utility room, wherever your dishwasher is or your washing machine is. Record these drone-making instruments. Here's one. There we go. I could have asked the UPS man to stop and said, "Excuse me, sir, could I record the drone of your engine?" Go and record some found sounds, because then you will notice that you've got that drone isn't just like a single tone. It's a hugely rich landscape of all these different noises. Especially if you chuck it through Isotope RX, then you can isolate all the different tones and the textures, and it's great. Dave Hillowitz does that on one of his things. He records one of the London tube trains braking, takes it through Isotope RX and isolates the screeching sound and then adds some of the texture at the top, and he creates this amazing pad. Brilliant. And then what you can do, once you've got all these, once you've generated your drone by either playing it live or putting something through Pull Stretch, recording a found sound, which you can then put through Pull Stretch, or use effects, you then think about how you can level up these drones so that they become something more. so that they give life to your track, not just this sense of space or emotion, but these drones need life in themselves. And the first go-to is obviously automation. We can automate the volume of your drone so that it progressively grows in volume. We can automate the EQ filters so that it progressively opens out from this kind of like muted to that type of sound. There's so much you can do with automation, and so many of my drones are automated in some way. I don't mean the creation of them, I mean the way that those drones grow and build. And that's what this step here is about. Giving life to your drone and allowing it to build, allowing it to grow beyond something that's just a sustained note. It needs to have life itself, and it needs to function musically itself. It needs to tell the story of your track itself. You know, if you're using a drone in Act 1, let the drone build and grow in Act 1. Use automation. Then you can use the next one, which is clusters. Now, those of you who don't know what clusters are, it's just basically imagine those times when a cat's jumped on a piano and the cat stepped on like 4 of the same keys that are really close together, or when you've slammed your hand down, it's kind of like a hammer fist hits the keys and a small group of notes play exactly the same time, to the point where where the key of it, or the tonality of that cluster is ambiguous. So you don't know what key you're in, you don't know what chord it is, except for those pitch perfect people who would say, yes, that's a G13 minus 11 at 9, whatever it is. That was my impersonation of people with perfect pitch. If you want to listen further, you probably know of clusters from the composer Ligeti, who's used it with music extensively in 2001, A Space Odyssey. It's kind of like creepy. It's very creepy when done well. It doesn't have to be creepy, but they do often end up sounding creepy just because of the way that we use these clusters, semitones, perhaps even quarter tones apart. I like to use quarter tones or sort of micro tuning to kind of make these clusters feel really claustrophobic and great. So and then you can automate the clusters. You can automate when those notes come in or how those clusters grow. And it's just brilliant. And then you start to get this like wall of sound. And then you realize, actually, I don't need anything else in my Act 1 except for a cluster and automation and effects. And it's just brilliant. And then, this one is kind of going back a little bit, because I want to kind of return back to how, if we were writing an orchestral track, how would you make a drone? You wouldn't use found sound and stuff like that. You would tell the bass player and the cello to play in octaves in their lowest registers. Perhaps you would do the opposite and say, tell the first and second violins to play in harmonics in their top registers, usually in octaves. So this one's really, really straightforward. This is like the start. I should really have started with this one, really. It's using octaves and pitches, unisons, layered to allow this to grow. And what I mean here is, say, for instance, you started with a bass doing a C0. Yeah, and that was doing that. Oh. Anyone can tell me if that truck driving past was in C0. Anyway, and then after a couple of seconds, you introduce a cello playing C1. And then you introduce the viola playing C2. Then you introduce the violin harmonics in whatever that is, C8. Not sure what the harmonics would be. But what you're doing is you're allowing that drone to grow. Or you could keep it all in C0, but instead of just the double basses, then you bring in the brass. Then you bring in the bassoon, the bass bassoon, that is. You layer using unison and octaves to tell a story of growth in the drone. And this is the whole purpose of this, is to kind of highlight to you, firstly, what drones are, secondly, how to make them, but thirdly, and I think most importantly, how you can use them to make your tracks even better. Because so much of what I do in my work is trying to take something very minimal and simple and let it grow into something wonderful. And in this case, drones. How you can take that one note and make it tell the story. You know, I did four whole albums of drones, and quite a few of them have landed on trailers. You know, I think I've shown, I've definitely shown those of you who've done I have a building drones course. And I don't mean building those helicopter drones with cameras. I mean building drones that build in music. Because that's what those tracks were. They were drones that built and grew and became something amazing and tense. There's so much you can do with a drone. And you'll notice there is a huge trend in trailers to have a drone throughout. Especially when it's like somebody who's done something bad and has gotten away with it, but this drone represents their building fear, building resentment, whatever it is, it's building intensity and emotion. And that's what these drones do. And that's what I want you to kind of take from this is you can turn a drone into an entire track and it be actually a really interesting track to listen to. It's so important that you can do this because that you can take that simplicity and then you can go, okay, well, maybe I'll just chuck some swish hits and pianos and stuff on there. And all of a sudden you've got this already rich landscape for your track to sit on. It's really fun. It's really good, a really good practice for you to understand the development of a trailer cue, the development of the characters. We're approaching this like a film composer. How can I tell the character's story with as little as possible? And in this case, it is a building drone. In this case, you use all the tools I've explained to you to create this thing that has its own life, that is the emotional story of the character. Ta-da! There we go. Drones, isn't it? Yeah, like I said, I have a course in this, building drones. You can find that on the website, but it's a really fun thing to do. And I really overlooked drones for such a long time. And now having had quite a lot of placements from drones, and quite a lot of the time it's like the drones stem from my tracks, it makes me realize that I'm really glad that I've put so much time into this thing. Because the editors will hear your track and they might say, you know what, the drone in the background is bloody fantastic. So it is worth you taking your time to make better drones. I know it's tempting to be like, just going to load up Keep Forest. And their drones are fantastic. It's tempting to load up these things. But even if you do that, try and take on board what I've taught you here. That is to give it this character itself that no one else would find anywhere. Guys, thanks for listening. You are absolute legends, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can always check out the blog post if you want to read more. Check out the course if you want to go even further in, and I will see you in the next episode.
Amazing.